Just a quick heads up for you guys before we start with the video. For those who own a PlayStation 5 and Ratchet Clank 2016, you can now download patch 1.08, which allows you to enjoy the game in 60 FPS. There is no option to disable it or enable it. It switches to 60 FPS on its own once you install patch 1.08. Insomniac Games actually released this patch update sooner than expected. So with that being said, let's get on with the video. Hello everyone, I'm Vivi and welcome to another Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart video. The topic for today's video: why Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart might be the next biggest game in the series. What I mean by biggest, in other words, best. Rift Apart could be the next best entry this series has never seen before. When looking at this series as a whole, the tentpole of the series I'd say is Ratchet & Clank: A Crack in Time, a game released in 2009 on the PlayStation 3. Not only does this game capitalize on the newly developed narrative of the future saga, but we can't forget its gameplay and overall theme that revolves around morality. Alistair Azimuth blaming himself for what happened to the Lombax race, that guilt took over him, and his decision surrounding the great clock to rewind time almost put the galaxy in jeopardy. In the end, he sacrificed his life trying to undo his mistake. Then we have a story surrounding Ratchet's longtime best friend and companion Clank, whether wanting to follow his destiny or follow Ratchet until he finds his own people. All these things put together renders A Crack in Time a staple of the series. Of course, this comes from a personal perspective. Now looking at Rift Apart, perhaps some might have one fear, and that fear is whether this new game appeals to longtime fans or not. Bear with me here. Although Rift Apart technically takes place after Into the Nexus, this was confirmed back in August during the presentation at Gamescom, it doesn't strictly follow its events. Marcus Smith had explained that Rift Apart is a game for both audiences. Going back to an interview held by Gamesradar back in January, Insomniac Games' Marcus Smith explained the following: the studio is trying to cater to more players than ever before, noting that if you've never played a Ratchet & Clank game before, this is an excellent one to start with, as the adventure is a standalone storyline. Still, longtime fans of the series will find deeper layers of connection to previous games. Okay, some might say, haven't I heard this before? Oh, Rift Apart being an excellent one to start with? Regardless, I believe the fact that Insomniac Games believes that Rift Apart falls within that category, well, I guess it is an excellent game to start with. Back in August, this is probably stuff you already know by now, thought it's worth bringing up again. Smith had also explained that lots of familiar faces in a different light would make it into Rift Apart. Putting these two statements together, longtime fans will recognize lots of characters, whether alternate or the version we're used to, who knows. That alone caters to those fans, longtime fans. Now on the other hand, the game is standalone, meaning newcomers will understand it. The fear that this gives rise to: okay, if this game caters to newcomers also, then will the story of Rift Apart be lackluster? Perhaps the story handling of the 2016 game left a sour taste in your mouth. Some perhaps are imagining, say, the return of the Lombaxes, or bits and pieces that follow Into the Nexus. Well, that's the thing. As stated previously, this does not strictly follow the story of Into the Nexus. That alone might cause fear, thinking that the story won't be as appealing as, say, A Crack in Time. To be quite frank here, we don't know much about Rift Apart. We are only aware of its surface. We only saw extended gameplay. We are yet to see new gameplay, if ever Insomniac Games is even planning to do so. Like, if you think about it, we haven't seen new gameplay since last August. Okay, so Vivi, you have a feeling the game will be good, or that it has potential? Is that what you're implying by the title? Well, I like to stick to the word potential, which later could translate to good. Although I myself, look, I shouldn't be jumping to conclusions. Like I just said, we don't know much about Rift Apart. But going over a few factors we know right now, I believe Rift Apart has the potential of being the next greatest Ratchet & Clank game. This is not me being biased towards the series. I'm simply trying to go over all the information we have on the table currently. Factor number 1. The biggest fact that could hold a lot of weight surrounding what I just said? Rift Apart's development period. If you were unaware, during the initial phase of Rift Apart, we had a different lead writer. And no, it's not TJ Fixman I'm referring to, the writer of the Future Saga until the 2016 game. No, it's not him. Alright, if we rewind. Going on Twitter, Sam Maggs, who now wrote Captain Marvel comics apparently, there's 3 volumes. To be exact, the 3rd one is on pre-order. Well, back then, she was given the position of lead writer for Rift Apart at Insomniac Games. Looking at the date of the tweet, we have June 11th, 2020. According to her tweet, so I was lead writer on this for a year and a half. From pretty much the word go. Surprise! I chose to leave the studio for a life of full-time freelancing back at the end of January. But it's really exciting to see these babies out in the world, and I can't wait to see what the incredibly talented team puts out there. Subtract a year and a half from the end of January 2020, that's when she left Insomniac Games. That will give us mid-2018 according to this online calculator. You know, I'm putting this up on screen just in case, not to make mathematical errors. So what are we now? We are in April 2021. Take into account the release date for this game, June 11th. Roughly, the game has been in development for almost 3 years. That's very, very good for Ratchet & Clank standards. The 2016 game, for example, although it's a byproduct of the movie, you know they had to release it because there's a movie and all that, the game had 10 months of development. Do you see how Rift Apart completely tramples development of the 2016 game? That factor alone gives big hope for this game. By the way, lead writer currently is Lauren May. Looking at the classic trilogy and Deadlocked, those games were roughly produced 1 year apart. Fans have a special place in their hearts looking at those games. Looking at Up Your Arsenal, its online mode took 13 months. The release between this and Going Commando, it was 1 year. Rift Apart has no multiplayer, at least not confirmed for now. And we're looking at 3 years of development for Rift Apart's campaign, story, and gameplay only. As for, say, A Crack in Time, that game was roughly 2 years in development, I believe. This is a rough guess, looking at Tools of Destruction, released in 2007. There was Quest for Booty in between, a short game which took like half a year. For how short Into the Nexus is, released in 2013, I mean, we did have Full Frontal Assault in 2012. For its short length of a game, the game I'd say was very close to the feeling of the previous Future Saga iterations. Again, it's all a matter of personal perspective. But then, the 2016 game happened. We had a bunch of mixed feelings, so again, I would understand where the fear stems from. Between Into the Nexus and Rift Apart's upcoming release, we have 2 Marvel Spider-Man installments. This is where we enter factor number 2. These 2 games are critically acclaimed and developed by Insomniac Games. IG, short for Insomniac Games, gained new experience with both Spidey titles, and I'm hoping that their experience with big IPs such as Marvel helps them deliver us with a big Ratchet & Clank game. I do admit, sometimes games take years and end up, you know, lackluster. However, seeing as how Rift Apart is not tied to a movie, not to mention they have a lot of creative freedom right now, we're not looking at a game based off a movie. Rift Apart has a possible chance of ranking as one of the best Ratchet & Clank games ever produced. If not the best. We never know. Remember, this is a PlayStation 5 exclusive. It's a really, really big deal for Insomniac Games. But, you know, there is also the question of how the writing will be handled, of course. With how immense the world of Rift Apart is, you know, the theme of alternate dimensions, well, we have factor number 3. There is so much they could do with the story. It's immense. Just the fact that we'll see familiar faces, I mean, just imagine, heck, Ratchet might see an alternate Azimuth. That would give Insomniac Games the chance to explore Ratchet's character portrayal from the comics. By the way, if you didn't know, these comics, well, the events in them take place after A Crack in Time. Heck, Ratchet might see his father, of course an alternate version of his father. Then again, this is a standalone game. Unless the game will have flashbacks, I'm not too certain if newcomers would even recognize, say, Azimuth or Caden. Nefarious, while newcomers know his character personality. He was in the 2016 game, although in organic form. The use of flashbacks or a journal of some sort could help new fans understand those familiar faces to us. If not for the emotional factor, we have the female Lombax. Maybe she has a very tragic story. Us diving into her world could reveal a bunch of interesting surprises. Factor number 4. Gameplay for Rift Apart so far looks pretty fun, if you ask me. The Rift Tether looks like a really cool gadget, in fact. Mike Daly at Insomniac Games explained during the Gamesradar interview that Ratchet's core movement is much faster and smoother, and that this type of traversal will allow players to have different playstyles. Our traversal moveset enables us to create traversal challenges that have you mix moves together in a satisfying chain, and lets players be more creative with how they move around the battlefield to outmaneuver enemies. Another very satisfying aspect of this gameplay, new weapons. Same article as before, fan favorite gadgets will make a return, that was mentioned in the article. From what we know so far, we have grind boots and swing shot. Unless the word gadget, they also meant weapons by it. But I mean, in terms of weapons, do expect new weapons, the demo itself proves that. Some fear that Rift Apart will yet again recycle old weapons. For now, I mean, all the weapons we've seen, they're new, unless you want to look at the burst pistol as another version of the combustor. We also have the female Lombax, confirmed playable. What this scene could mean for gameplay, Clank might team up with her, and maybe have some special puzzles for Clank, not to mention having unique style of gameplay with this female Lombax. After all, the PlayStation 5 page for this game does state the following: warp across battlefields to rapidly gain your combat advantage and repair planetary rifts with dimension-spanning puzzles. Discover Clank's all-new interdimensional mechanics. It might not imply that Clank having puzzles will be with the mystery Lombax girl, but you know, Clank puzzles are confirmed. Maybe you're not surprised by that one, but there it is. As for what kind of balance they're aiming for with Ratchet and this Lombax girl, you know, in terms of gameplay, like how often we'll get to play as her, or whether or not she's gonna overshadow the gameplay of Rift Apart. I mean, we don't know those things, but since she is confirmed playable, A Crack in Time, for example, a significant portion of the game was without Clank. Clank had his own section at the Great Clock. Although our duo were apart for the majority of the time, the gameplay and story of that game made up for it. So if Insomniac Games is aiming for a similar style, you know, a significant portion with female Lombax, who knows how it'll turn out, but that's not what I'm expecting with Rift Apart. Lastly, factor number 5.
Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart. A brand new, full-length, interdimensional adventure built from the ground up.
Rift Apart is confirmed of being a full-length, interdimensional adventure. This was confirmed back in June 2020, when the game was first announced. So if you were afraid that this game would be short, well, Insomniac Games explains that it's a full-length game. As for what they technically mean by full-length, I mean how many hours and stuff like that, we don't know. But the words full-length to me reminds me of games such as Tools of Destruction and A Crack in Time. Heck, I think back to the length of, say, Going Commando or, you know, the games from the classic trilogy. So, long story short, with all of the factors I've mentioned in the video, I do have hope for Rift Apart. And I really cannot wait to get my hands on Rift Apart. That is, of course, if I can get my hands on a PlayStation 5 first. So with that being said, folks, this is it for the video. If you have any questions or anything of such sort, or if you disagree or agree with stuff I've said in the video, leave it all in the comment section below, alright? And as always, I've been Vivi, and thank you so much for watching.